I'm not a coward who hides behind a gun. I would never take the life of another. For I am...
Batman, look out!
The Dark Knight. The last remaining beacon of morality in the shadows of this town.
Wait, what was that?
What?
I'm sorry, I do not have time to do a scripted video about this movie. I've got way too many things on my plate, and you know, I'm getting the distinct impression that it's not likely it's going to affect my metrics anyway. Who knows? You guys might actually like non-scripted as opposed to scripted for this movie. We'll see. This is my first time doing an on-camera video with the new microphone. I lost the microphone blocking thing now. Everyone's gonna hear me pop my peas, oh my god. This is mostly going to be an off-the-cuff, just my thoughts having seen it twice. And you know, I was gonna make a section of this video about spoilers, but I'm gonna do a whole spoiler discussion of this movie with Malik and Brianna tomorrow, and I think I can pretty decently capture my thoughts on this movie without spoiling it here. So for my spoiler thoughts on the movie, I'll link that video in the description once it's up, and this is going to be a totally spoiler-safe video. But anyway, I think what needs to be gotten out of the way immediately is that I love this movie. I love this movie a lot, and I liked it even more on the second viewing than I did on the first, and I get the feeling that this is going to be one of those that goes up in my estimation basically every time I watch it. I feel like I'm doing this movie a bit of a disservice whenever I begin to compare it to other movies, be that other movies in this genre or even just other Batman movies. So I'm gonna try my best not to do that. I think it's definitely in the same tier as like The Dark Knight and The Mask of the Phantasm. It might be better for me than either of those movies. It might be slightly lower, I don't know, but they're all, you know, they're all of a kind, quality-wise for me. The Batman, for those who don't know, follows a Batman who's been around for a couple of years, and who is being faced with his, as far as we know, first real big challenge in the Riddler, and the Riddler is a challenge for him because he sets him on this path through a conspiracy that ends up holding a lot of personal connections to Bruce Wayne and to Selina Kyle, who he ends up crossing paths with. This is a movie where if you liked the trailers and if you've been gung-ho for the marketing, I'm pretty confident that that's it. You're gonna love this movie. This movie is just its own trailers blown up to 3 hours. It's not one of those movies where it's hiding something from you and it's this whole other story than it seems to be in its marketing. The marketing stylistically, even down to the music choices, the plot that it sells you on, it's very much the movie that you're going to get. I will say there are two ways in which that's not true, and there are ways that this movie does what I kind of love when a movie does, which is if there's something in the marketing that makes me a little bit trepidatious, and then I end up seeing the movie, and those fears or that sort of anxiety is completely alleviated by the actual content of the movie. One of those is the tone of it, because people keep saying, oh, this is a dark Batman, this is like the darkest Batman yet. And yeah, this is a dark movie in terms of subject matter and presentation, but I think what calling it the darkest Batman movie maybe misses is that this is a very hopeful movie, and this is a movie that has a lot of faith in the human condition and a lot of faith in Bruce Wayne, Batman as a character, to be a decent person, and just overall faith in people to be decent. And it's a movie about building a kinder Batman, and one of the reservations that I had from the marketing was that this Bruce Wayne might be a little bit too brutal, a bit too detached. And I didn't want, especially after longtime viewers know how I feel about Zack Snyder and Ben Affleck's take on Batman in Batman v Superman, I didn't want another aggro Batman who was, all violence and wasn't afraid to kill people and, that sort of thing. This movie, for one, has a Batman who kills nobody, which, how long has it been since that happened? I think this might actually be the first on-screen Batman who doesn't kill anyone, because even Nolan's Batman, cheated once or twice. But this Bruce Wayne, very dedicated to not killing, and the movie never flexes on that. And the movie is very much about Batman coming from a place of cynicism and being a blunt instrument, and how Batman has to be more than that, and how Batman has to come from a place of hope. And I was really shocked when this movie earned that feeling. Saying that the movie is about that thematically I feel almost bad for even saying that much, because it hit me so hard seeing it in the theater and realizing what the movie was doing, and especially on a second viewing, as you go back through the rest of the movie and see just how much it was building to the idea of this movie being about a more hopeful Batman. A Batman who can mean more for Gotham than just being this symbol of fear meant to frighten people. And when the movie gets to that point, it feels so refreshing and so uplifting. That's an adjective that I think suits this movie that I haven't heard anyone talk about, is that it's a very uplifting movie. And Bruce Wayne, as a character, has a really interesting, really compelling and nuanced arc about getting to that place. And it's the best feeling to have with one of these, because it's such a powerful, affecting, self-contained arc for a movie that could never have any continuation and yet still totally work, and that's a perfectly satisfying place to bring this character and then stop. But it's also, I can't wait to see more of this Batman, and in the last few minutes of this movie, I feel like Robert Pattinson has become my favorite take on the character because of where we get him to by the end, and I'm so eager to see more of this guy. And Robert Pattinson plays it so perfectly. Bruce Wayne in general, I think, can be a harder character to play than people give it credit for, because I think you've got people like Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton, and even to a degree Christian Bale, who are giving just these A-plus top-tier performances, but the writing for Bruce Wayne is maybe difficult to pattern a performance around. I don't know the best way to say it, but I feel like Bale probably got it best, but for a long time now, I feel like writers and directors have maybe had a hard time getting Bruce Wayne, the character, to be so compelling that he really does anchor the movies that he's in. And this movie is completely anchored in Bruce Wayne's character journey. And there's so many things about it distinct from Robert Pattinson that work, and I'll get into in a minute, but it's all in service of the character of Bruce Wayne, and humanizing him and making him this guy whose emotional journey you're invested in, and who you could basically be content to watch do anything. I could watch Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne do anything and I'd have a good time, I think. He's so good. As far as the live-action Batmans go, I think he's my definitive one. I love Bale, and overall Kevin Conroy still takes it for me, but Robert Pattinson just gets the character, and there's never a moment where I feel like I'm just watching Robert Pattinson. I sometimes felt like I was, watching Christian Bale deliver lines. This feels like a fully realized Bruce Wayne in the performance and in the writing. But aside from that, the cast is perfect. Matt Reeves, honestly, is a guy who never misses in terms of casting, and this whole movie is just watching brilliant performers bounce off each other endlessly for 3 hours. Zoe Kravitz obviously is a great Selina Kyle. Like, she also has a great complementary character journey that parallels Bruce's really well, and she's just a very compelling character, and it's a very compelling turn. I will say, this isn't even like a problem with the movie, it's just sort of where I stand with it. I think Kravitz and Pattinson have spectacular chemistry. Their chemistry is amazing. And Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle are really, really well done as complementary love interests, and even just they have a complementary relationship beyond any sort of romance. But I think with the way that this movie ends, there's a sense that the idea of the two of them is like this whirlwind, like life-changing romance is almost there for me. It's almost there, but something about it isn't quite there. It's like 90%. And it just, I don't know what I would change to tip it over, but there's just something nebulous that to me is just like, something about this romance needed just a little bit more juice to be like peak all-time comic book movie romances. And granted, part of that might just be, you know, you've got an uphill battle to climb with a Bruce Wayne who is so deliberately disconnected and is deliberately avoiding any kind of meaningful entanglement with people. I feel like in terms of the rest of the cast, John Turturro and Jeffrey Wright are two who I worry are going to get overlooked a lot in the discussion of this one. Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon is, I think, just over Gary Oldman and tips into being my favorite Gordon. And I think part of that is obviously Wright's performance, where he's really the most grounded, just, you know, working Joe personality in the movie, and that makes him a really good contrast, not just for Batman, but pretty much everyone else. But, you know, it's the performance, and it's the fact that Gordon and Batman, for the first time in these live-action movies, I think have a really efficient, profoundly trusting, just like well-oiled machine working relationship. And again, Oldman's version kinda had that, but even with Oldman, there was a bit of distance between the Batman and Commissioner Gordon. In this movie, the two are ostensibly partners, and they complement each other so well, and there's a lot of implicit history and trust in that relationship, and it's just the most endeared I've ever been to Batman and Gordon as a double act. And John Turturro plays Carmine Falcone, and man, John Turturro's a guy who doesn't always pop up in like mainstream stuff like this, but when he does, you can always tell that he's like a guy who is very much dedicated to character acting, and Carmine Falcone is, you know, he's like the standard Gotham mob boss whenever you need a mob boss in a Batman story, and it would be very easy to play him in a way where he is just, you know, kind of a straight stereotype or archetype even. But John Turturro gives these little bits and nuggets of humanity, and he's got this, and when there's the occasional moment where it's just time for him to, you know, own the room, he takes full advantage of that. And Colin Farrell as Penguin is really just very entertaining. Like, of all the big main cast members in this movie, he's very much the smallest one, but he's got a healthy-sized role, and he's just, you know, he's there to be, I suppose you'd say the closest this movie gets to comic relief, but it's such a interesting performance, and I'm eager to see what we do when he gets his own show. I'm very curious as to what the Colin Farrell Penguin series is going to look like, and I'm sure that it'll be something that'll be carried by that performance. But the real standout, I think, in the cast is Paul Dano as the Riddler. And I'll tell you, if you had sort of the question mark over your head, like the Riddler question mark over your head, as to why we're not showing Paul Dano's face at all in any of the marketing, it's not necessarily because there's any kind of big secret being kept with what's under Riddler's mask. It's just because so little of his screen time is actually Paul Dano's face. Most of it is him in that mask and those glasses, and his face is so obscured. But Paul Dano does this spectacular eye acting, where from the first moment that he is on screen, and basically every scene where his face is totally covered up by that mask, pay attention to his eyes, especially if it's your second, or if you're rewatching the movie, you'll notice how much character is being communicated and how many things about his motivations are being seeded just in his expressions, and it's all in the eyes. And Dano just gives this spectacular performance as someone who is clearly, not mentally well, but as it becomes clearer and clearer throughout the movie what's actually going on with the Riddler, he is such an interesting character and the perfect foil for this Batman. Like, one of my things going into this is, Batman's got such a varied rogues gallery that with every new Batman movie, my question always kind of becomes, okay, why are we choosing to do this villain? Why was this villain the one that made the most sense to put in this story? And the reason why this had to be a Riddler story goes beyond just, Riddler's MO being the best suited to a detective narrative. Riddler, as portrayed in this movie, is a perfect foil for the journeys of Batman and Catwoman. But yeah, there will just be moments where, with just like a little twitch of an eye, Dano communicates so much. And Pattinson actually is the same way, to round it back off with Robert Pattinson. He also does a lot of spectacular eye acting as well. And that I really feel like is obviously those two performers being just great at their craft, but it's also just the power of Matt Reeves, like knowing how much of an actor's director that guy is. And we do so much paralleling between Bruce and Riddler and Catwoman, and they make such an interesting trifecta throughout this movie in ways that I'll for sure get deeper into when I talk spoilers. But what I love about Riddler this time is that for the first time, really, I feel like, maybe outside of comics, I don't know, for the first time in any non-comic thing, I believe that this is a Riddler who gives Batman a run for his money in terms of being genuinely stumped by him. Not so much in terms of the riddles, although those are also very clever, but just on a character level, there's never been a version of a Riddler that I feel really confronts Bruce Wayne in the way that this Riddler does. And it's so great to have a version of this character finally who does that. This is another one of those comic book movies that really doesn't go overboard with the action, which I appreciate. It has its very, very good action sequences, and there's one in particular that I think maybe could have been trimmed slightly. I think you're going to hear a lot of complaints about this movie being too long. I think there's like 2 scenes that I would trim anything from in this movie, and one of them is the car chase with the Penguin. That goes on a little long. But beyond that, the action is actually very quick and efficient in this movie. It gets in, it's just the thrill ride for a minute or two and then it gets out. And the score, my gosh. This movie and Spider-Man No Way Home are in a lot of ways perfect complements, I think. And part of that is that they both have freaking rockin' scores by one Michael Giacchino. And this score is just perfect for this movie. and it can range between very tense fitting of the grounded detective narrative, and it can become very bombastic or very high-end emotional, and I like that it, goes to each of those extremes. Obviously, the visual directing from Reeves is gonna be, it has been the thing that people have been talking about, and it's the thing that people are going to keep talking about, because it really is that good. I don't think a comic book movie has looked this good in a long time. Like this, off the top of my head, like if someone came up to me and said, this is the best looking comic book movie ever made in terms of cinematography, I'd be like, I'd be hard pressed to think of examples to say that you're wrong. It really is that good. Matt Reeves just has that much of an eye for how to tell his story visually, And that direction and the score come together to make a Gotham that feels grounded and gritty, but also heightened and fantastical in this very subtle way that I'm very glad that this movie managed to achieve. Because if it was too grounded, then I worry that it might have lost the point of being a Batman movie to the point where Batman himself felt out of place in it. That thankfully never happens. There is a degree of melodrama to this movie, I think is the best way to put it. And it's just, man, it all fires on all cylinders. If I had any complaint, and it is alleviated in the second viewing, but it's still present, it's that I think this movie has some slight structural issues in the third act, where I would just take one or two specific scenes that I can't get into because of spoilers and reorder them or space them out in a way differently to how they're spaced out in the finished movie, because once we leave the second act and come into the third act, there's some things that I think happen too quick, or some payoffs that I think could have been set up just slightly more, and the real issue of it is just that the rest of the movie is so perfect that the things that are not perfect stick out, and there's just one or two thematic things and one or two structural things, and I'm like, if you change this and made it this instead, this movie would be perfect, unassailable, absolutely all-time masterpiece. And it's still a masterpiece, but it's the greatness, the sheer magnitude of its success for 98% of it makes that 2% so close. But yeah, this is just a spectacular movie. It's the best Batman movie that we've gotten in 15 years, easy, since The Dark Knight, no question. I think it earns the title of The Batman. I think it is definitive in a lot of ways, and I really can't wait to get into what I think those ways are when I talk about spoilers. So I hope that you will, for one, like and subscribe to this channel, and check out the spoiler discussion that will be going up on another channel that I'll link here, and I'll make a community post about it. So definitely keep up with the channel if you want to know what's going on that front. But yeah, if you've seen the movie, let me know what you thought. If you haven't seen it, let me know what some of your expectations are, and just put those in the comments. And thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.
When criminals fight me, it's exhausting, because I'm good. So they often have to nap afterwards.
Wait, you can't be this. You think they're sleeping?
Look at that poor little guy. He's all tuckered out.